Seriously.
I do it different.
Yeah?
More.
There's usually no starch on the plate.
Okay.
Which is hard for a country girl.
Yeah.
Meat, potatoes, and veggies, not in that order.
Yeah, yeah.
Potatoes and veggies.
Yeah, I understand. That's awesome.
It's been off.
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else?
Probably
Meal planning? Have you been able to do it every week this month?
mostly every week this month.
Okay,
And
that's awesome.
for me, sometimes it's just from day to day, that's how bad my schedule is.
Yeah,
So, or how good, whichever way you want to look at it is.
yeah,
But I find that even if I sit down the night before, I'm flat out my next day.
yeah,
That it is way, way better than not having done that and getting up in the morning and try brushing them
yeah,
and get my lunch together
totally.
for the workday. So,
That's great.
yeah. I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Under Live Well, what is the negative bilateral abduction test? I've tried to,
Yeah.
What is that for?
What is that for? So that's to test your hip position and to see if you're neutral. And so a lot of times we tend to not be neutral. We tend to favor and be more in a right stance. So we tend, like you'll notice if you're standing or anyone standing, we tend to kind of favor the right side. And so because of that, we get a little bit off. And so we tend to, those muscles get stronger and we tend to be in this position rather than being able to go back and forth. Same way, so the way I'll show you guys and on the ground, but you can test yourself. It's a little bit better when someone else tests you, but you can lay on your side with your legs like this. You can put something under your head, and then you should be able to go back to where your leg is here and touch your knee down on both sides. So you'll notice like my right side I can do that, my left side is a little bit harder. So I've been working on it. So blowing up the balloon like we've been working on, that's part of the reason why we do this. So then you should be able to go to the other side and go all the way back and down and see how I can't quite touch.
Yeah.
That's because I favor my right side. So the
Okay.
more you do the blowing up the balloon, the better that
The
should be.
better that is?
So it's kind of like a self, you can test it. Sometimes if you should test before, blow up the balloon, and then retest again, and then it should get better a little bit. And then the more you do it, you should be able to, whereas before, like I could barely go down at all, whereas now I can, I'm getting closer. So,
Well,
Yeah.
I like the blowing up the balloon part. That's
yeah.
one of my favorite things.
Great. Anyone else want to share?
Thank you.
Sure.
Actually, takeaway that I've taken is the fat
Yeah.
portion of it. I didn't realize Matt was talking about how trans fat can actually change your body
Yeah.
at the molecular level.
Yeah.
That was quite interesting for me.
Yeah.
That was a good takeaway for me.
Okay. It's Steve and
Sally.
Right, okay. Sally, what about y'all?
It was the carbs for me,
Okay.
because I've done weight loss before and concentrated more on calories and fat.
Yeah,
I never really paid attention to the carbs,
okay.
and I think that's been a difference. My stomach, I've noticed a huge difference with
Okay.
the carbs.
That's amazing. Anyone else?
The carbs
The carbs.
and learning how to incorporate veggies into breakfast.
Okay, great.
And teach my husband that we don't have to have potatoes, we can have cauliflower that's mashed up.
Yeah.
He's liking it.
Yeah. What about you?
Moving.
Moving, okay. Like moving
I
on.
wasn't moving before.
Okay,
I'm moving now, but I'm
Okay.
sore all the time.
yeah, yeah. Your body will get more used to it as you do it more, so that's
She's
great.
been asking how long will it take, but
It's like, do I have to be the perfect physical specimen before I stop hurting?
So you missed the part where he said it's a lifetime change.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a lifetime.
Bob, do you still hurt after your workouts? Bob's been consistently working out for what, 3 years?
It's 3 years in December.
Yeah. So do you still feel sore after workouts? No.
It depends on the workout.
Yeah. Yeah. And
But
if you do
it goes
something,
away.
yeah. And as you do new novel things, you're going to be more sore. And so if you're constantly doing something new, then you'll probably be more sore. But as your body adapts to it, it's not.
Just like, I haven't used
Yeah.
that muscle.
Yeah. Yep. Arnold, what about you?
I think for me, the two ones that I took away were how much it matters, like what the meat that you eat eats.
Yeah.
And I think that was like really, like learning about the butter, the difference and like in the way this tastes, it's just
Yeah.
what the calorie. And the other one was moving away from the meat being center of my plate to
Okay.
vegetables being center.
Yeah. That's great.
And the quality food.
Yeah.
And it's-
That's what we're talking about today. That's a great intro into what we're talking about. So if you go to your little handout, again, the title is wrong, but the information in there is correct. But it's page 55. So if you want to turn to page 55, that's our seminar for the day. Is anybody warm? You guys warm? Would you mind turning the air down a little, Jamila? Thank you. So we're going to be filling these in. At the end, I'm not going to give this to you quite yet, but I'll have kind of my handout here that's going to walk you through everything. So if you miss things, I would say just kind of paraphrase as we talk about it, and then I'll give you this at the end, and it'll give you kind of like detailed descriptions of each, because it's quite confusing, and labels are meant to, I don't think necessarily meant to confuse us, but they're definitely, especially for things that people are trying to sell, you have to remember that like marketers and like when they're, advertising their product, they want you to buy their food. And so what are they going to do to get you to buy it? They're going to use like these kind of words or phrases that we think are healthy, but aren't necessarily healthy,
Oh, yeah.
or the best thing for us.
We've
Like
been,
the heart on the oatmeal buns.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's all of these misconceptions. So
It's gotta be good for you.
yeah,
we've been watching the commercials and going, oh, they're so they have no clue.
Yeah. So we're going to go through all of the definitions and what these things, what they actually mean, and then kind of some fun facts. And then if you have questions as we go through, like, what would I get in this category? Where would I find it? We can cover that. So it's going to be pretty interactive, and just kind of filling in the gaps from the month of, what exactly is grass-fed and going into that. So we're going to start with local. So local is considered food grown within 100 miles of its origin. So 100 miles, what does it say? Of its point of purchase or consumption. So the best way to get this is at a farmer's market. It's point of purchase. So it's hard to get. Sometimes thankfully we live in Southern California where there are quite a few farms, so sometimes it'll say local, like in Sprouts or other places, but then you want to look at where it says local. Sometimes that means Northern California, which is still, local to our state and better definitely than getting it, from Mexico or from out of the country. Yeah, where we get a lot of our food. So ideally you would want to eat local as much as possible. So fun little fact, the average American meal travels over 1,500 miles before purchase or consumption, which if you think about like the carbon footprint and what that looks like and how it's probably not, what it was like when it was picked by the time we actually eat it is probably not that great. And so what happens a lot of time, they pick things really early and then they put them in these chambers to artificially ripen them, which means that they're not getting like the sunlight and the minerals and nutrients from the soil. And so by the time you actually eat it, it's very far from when it was picked from whatever plant it was growing on. So ideally local. So that's my big, I guess the best thing to get this at would be at a farmer's market because it's really hard to get local otherwise, like I said. So Sprouts, there are a few things that you can get local, but you kind of have to look at it and actually see where it's from. So any questions on that? We would love to have a farmer's market eventually, Glendora, that would be awesome. But the ones that we go to are I think I've said this before, but Pasadena and Claremont. So the Claremont one is on Sunday mornings from 9 to 1. And then the Pasadena one is Saturday mornings and Thursday evenings. And then there's a couple other little ones, like I think Pomona has one. Monrovia has like their street fair, but I haven't been in the last couple of years. I've heard it's not great for like produce. Okay.
There's Pasadena has one.
Okay.
And for anyone that believes in using the Gold Line,
Yeah.
it's great
Okay.
for that reason.
Okay.
It's within walking distance.
Okay. Have you been going to it?
I've gone to that. I've
Okay.
gone to that one and the Claremont one.
Okay.
My favorite is the Claremont.
Yeah. That's great.
We go to Hollywood,
Oh, you don't?
visit our daughter.
Oh, fun.
and go
Okay.
to the giant farmer's market.
Okay.
It's like blocks and blocks of,
Where is this?
In Hollywood?
oh,
Yeah. That's so fun.
It's a dual purpose. We visited our daughter who lives there, so.
There you go. Good excuse. I've heard another really good one in called by like Venice area, Santa Monica. I've heard there's another really good one there. Has anyone been to that one? No? Okay. I heard that's a good one. So if you're
Yeah,
out
a lot
that
of the
way.
same people from Hollywood do the Santa Monica one.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. So that is local. Our next definition is pasture raised. Does anyone want to take a stab at what pasture raised means?
Just out in the pasture, eating the grass that's there.
Yeah, yep,
Just that.
And
with
not
no
confined.
pesticides or,
yeah,
hopefully.
yeah, I know, right?
We are what our food eats.
What was that?
We are what our
Our food eats. Yes, we are.
Yes.
That's a great phrase. I love that. So animals that are raised on pasture or given access to pasture are pasture raised. They're not confined to the indoors, and they should eat sizable portions of organic grass, which is grass not treated with synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. So just like Evelyn said, 100% grass-fed is the next one. And that means that they're able to they should be able to graze and technically be pasture raised. That doesn't always mean that. Sometimes they just have a diet full of grass, but ideally it would be both. So a lot of times what they'll do, I was just learning about chickens and their eggs. So a lot of times they'll say, pasture raised or free range. But what happens then is they give them supplemental feed that's grain and corn and soy. Which is a bummer. So you want 100% grass-fed. That's going to be really hard to find for chickens. But for beef, what a lot of times they'll do for cows is they'll put them out in pasture, and then to give them the excess calories that they need, they'll give them extra grass that just kind of comes, like they would normally feed cows kind of in a trough. So, and that's okay because they're still getting all grass-fed, but you want to make sure that it's 100% grass-fed. So ideally it would be 100% grass-fed and pasture-raised, but those two things don't necessarily go hand in hand. Does that make sense? So grass-fed could mean the cow just gets fed grass
Just in this
little box, yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean. So ideally you would want both 100% grass-fed and pasture-raised. So pasture-raised means they're given access to a pasture. And as I've read more, sometimes the bummer,
Grass-finished, too.
They're like
Yes.
free to go where they want to go.
Yeah,
right? Within a much larger area.
yes. So this one is given access to a pasture. So sometimes that's the other bummer is it will say pasture raised, and I forget if this is one of the ones, I didn't make a note on there, if this is one of the ones that they regulate. I don't think it is, but sometimes they're just given access, but they don't necessarily go out there. Or it's like, they'll say that for chickens, but it's like they're all inside and then they have this little bit of grass, and that way they can say pasture ranged or free range, even though they probably don't actually spend most of their time outside. So you want to think like, I want my animal that I'm eating or getting my food from to be outside, getting sunlight, eating, grass and things that grow in the ground, not artificial things. So 100% grass-fed, I'll put that on there, just means it's different too than, they could feed grass on this one that's fed with pesticides or chemicals. So that's the other bummer, is that there's all these different things, so it might have one, but maybe not the other. So 100% grass-fed means that they were allowed to at least graze for their own fresh food, but we don't know necessarily what the percentage is of them being able to get their own food versus, right, it just being set in front of them. So able to graze for their own food, and they only ate grass, and only grass or veggies. So you want to make sure it's 100% grass-fed. Don't settle for less. The animals could be fed grass, but also grain if it doesn't say 100%. So there's different ways they'll say this. They'll say grass-fed and grass-finished, which means that they just ate all grass. So that's another way they'll say it, but you kind of want to look for the 100%, because that's what, I think there's a couple different companies, but like the Kerrygold butter, that's one of the things that I heard in their cheese. We really like their products, but it says grass-fed, but then the more I've read, they do like 95% grass-fed, but then at the end, they give them grain, which then, especially if it's something that they're eating towards the end of their life, you're probably going to get more of that in the food that you're eating. So ideally, 100% grass-fed, but some grass fed is definitely better than none at all, if you don't find anything with 100% grass fed. So, any questions? I know this is a lot, so I'm happy to answer questions as we're going. Does anyone have a favorite 100% grass fed meat that they have found, and where did you find it?
Sprouts have it.
Yeah, Sprouts has it. So they have 100% grass fed ground beef, and it's actually pretty, Sprouts.
Sprout.
Yeah, it's actually pretty, it's not too expensive, so, and it'll go on sale quite often, and so that's where we get our grass-fed ground beef. We also get it from Amy's Farm, and their ground beef is really good, as well as all of their other meats, and it meets all of these requirements. So they don't have meat all of the time. Actually, Diana Glyer told me, she was like, oh, I found, because I've gone quite a bit, and they usually have some type of pork, but they don't usually have beef, but they must have recently killed a cow. And so last time I went, there was a bunch of different types of steaks. So we got like osso buco, we got fillets, we got ground beef, and it's quite, like the taste is, we made it for some friends, and they're like, wow, I've never tasted meat that tastes this good. But it's like, that's because it's high quality, grass-fed, pasture-raised and all that, and you really can't taste a difference when you compare, just like the cheap meat that you get at the store. So, yeah. Okay, so wild caught, I'm gonna erase this. Wild caught is really important. So if you think about, same thing like the fish, I don't know if, has anyone ever seen
Fall into this little box.
has anyone seen a fish farm before? Yeah, it's pretty gross. Yeah, when I saw pictures and videos of it, I was like, okay, that's gross. I'm already a little hesitant with seafood. It's not my favorite thing. I've grown to like it more, but,
We saw it at Disney World.
oh really?
Yeah.
They have fish farms.
Yeah, because they have their little garden
Oh,
thing that you go through, and
Okay.
they show you how they grow
okay.
a lot of their vegetables.
Yeah.
And then they take you through the fish farm.
Okay, it's pretty gross, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they
They're
kind of
like
just
all-
like swim in their own poop, and they're just like right next to each other. And so, so wild caught means they're in their natural habitats. Let me put this up here. I'm gonna use a different pen. Sorry, this one's going out. Okay, wild caught. So natural habitats. You'll notice that, like the difference between salmon that's farmed versus salmon that is wild caught is going to have a lot less fat, because it's not obviously fed, it's fed things that are not normal to its environment. So if you look at, farmed salmon, it's going to be a lot fattier and it'll be a lighter color, but it's going to have a lot more omega-6s and obviously the type of fat that you don't necessarily want to eat, because it's fed grain and the type of stuff that we don't want them to eat. So the wild caught is obviously going to just eat what's in its environment. And so it'll be like a much brighter pink for salmon specifically, and it'll have less fatty acids, but more of the omega-3. So again, the balance of, it's going to have a lot more omega-3 than the omega-6s in the wild caught. So they're in their natural habitats, and let's see what else. I think that's all I put for that one. And you'll just notice the difference in taste too when you get the farmed versus the fresh. So it'll say you can get wild caught that's both frozen and fresh, and both are okay, because sometimes the transportation, a lot of times they catch them, they freeze them. So we got, I think I shared this last time, but we got a bunch of the wild caught Copper River salmon this summer, and then we've just frozen it and pulled out fillets. They had at Costco this week, they had wild caught halibut, which they're kind of on the tail end of wild caught fish right now. But they had wild caught halibut, so I got a few of those fillets and froze them so we can pull those out. But it's hard to find. Sprouts has it, but sometimes, especially when it's not in season, the price is pretty high. So I would say if you see it cheaper, then Ginny does this. She goes to Sprouts. She asks them, so one thing you do want to know is that if it is wild caught, great, whether it's fresh or frozen, but if it was previously frozen and then they defrost it, you're not supposed to freeze it again. So you kind of have to use it. So you can go like to Sprouts, and Ginny will go in and say, oh, do you have any frozen fillets that you haven't started to defrost of the salmon? And they'll say yes. So she'll get that and then just take that and put it in her freezer. she gave me that little tip, so.
When it's on sale, I
Yeah.
just stock up.
That's what I did, yep. I was like, this is great, I'm just gonna, how many frozen fillets do you have? I'll take them all. Yep. So that is wild caught. Does anyone have a favorite wild caught fish that they have tried recently?
Go fishing.
Go fishing, yeah. You could also fish and catch your own. That's the best if you can do that. If you don't like fishing, then,
I just don't know how to clean a fish.
yeah, I know.
If you don't like to clean fish, look it up online because the hours change. Right now, it's just, I think, Saturday, Sunday. Mount Goldie Fish Farm, Trout Farm. And they have 3 different pools, if you will. And it's small, medium, and large.
Okay.
And you can get the bait there and the fishing poles and everything.
Okay.
It's a little pricey because when after you've caught the fish, there's a gentleman there that will clean it and get it all ready for you to take home.
Okay.
He'll even tell you how to cook it.
Okay.
So
Is it farmed though? Like, are they,
It's not, they're in ponds, but they're not farmed,
okay,
like, you know, like the crowd, like you
yeah,
said.
okay,
Yeah.
The waters go through and you can
Okay.
spend a day and not catch one if it's a hot day because they all go to the bottom.
okay,
But for us, we always took the grandkids and then
okay,
we had it, and then it was a science project because
yeah,
you had to pull the bone out.
yeah, yep, exactly.
So, but if you don't like to clean them, they'll do them for you.
Yeah. So my first exposure to really good salmon, I always said my whole life, like, I don't like salmon, it's gross, you know, it's really fishy. And Allie, one of our coaches that used to work here, she is from Alaska, and she went to Alaska to visit our family, went fishing, caught a bunch of salmon and brought it back and like froze it, and she made it, and she was like, I know you don't like salmon, but just give this one a chance. And I tried it, and I was like, this is amazing. This is a totally different flavor. It's not fishy at all. And it just like, you know, there was little bones in it, which at first I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. But that kind of just changed for me. I was like, oh, wow, like it does taste very different. I had always just grown up and, you know, eaten in restaurants, just the farm stuff that has like the artificial dyes in it and all of that. So that's the other thing. A lot of times salmon or certain fish, they will artificially dye them to make them look a certain color because that's what we think they should be. But they're not getting the nutrients they need because they're farmed. So they have to inject them with a dye, which can't be good, right? So, any questions on the wild caught before we move on?
My whole idea of that changed when I went to Alaska.
Yeah. Have you been fishing there?
And I said, no.
No? Okay, you
I
just
was
went to
out
visit.
on the
Okay.
water.
That's
No,
the fish
I'm
farm at
sick
Disney
girl.
World.
Ooh, yeah. Okay.
But
And they're just all
Yeah,
cramped
they're
in
all
there,
in
yeah.
in their little
when I was
box.
told I was put into it,
Yeah,
I was like, no. The only kind of fish I'll get is wild caught fish.
yeah. Great. So next we're going to go into raw. So this term I think has a lot of negative connotations, so we're going to kind of talk about that and see what you guys think. So it's dairy products that come from 100% grass-fed cows. It's not pasteurized, so I'll put 100% grass-fed. It's not pasteurized, which means it's not heated. And so pasteurization actually started, pasteurized, make sure I spell that right, when I think it was like in the 50s or 60s when I guess this guy just went around to farms, and at that time farmers were like really struggling to sell their dairy products because if it was too long, then their dairy products would go bad, and they were worried about contamination, and they didn't have great ways to test it at that time. And so this guy went around to a bunch of farms, and it kind of caught on and said, well, you need to pasteurize your dairy products, and that'll make them last longer, people won't get sick, and it's kind of like a guarantee for you. But what they didn't realize is, I think they might have realized at the time, but by doing that and kind of turning everything into pasteurized, it kills off a lot of the good proteins that are in the dairy products, which is part of the reason why we want to eat the dairy products. And so there's a lot of benefits to raw dairy products, but the most important thing with this is getting it from a source that takes really good care of their cattle. So like we kind of talked about, like when you drive down Highway 5 and you see, a bunch of the cows kind of like just living in their own poop, it stinks really bad. They're taking the dairy from those cows, and then they're heating it, and so they don't care if there's pus that comes out when they're milking the cows. They don't care if there's blood. They don't care if they have any type of infection, because they know that the heating of that dairy product will kill all of that stuff, which is really gross when you start to think about it. So they tested, there was like a study done where they tested like the raw dairy versus the pasteurized dairy, and they found that like before it was heated, that the quality of the dairy and like all of the extra things in the pasteurized dairy was a lot worse, and just like there was a lot of times traces of manure in it and just different things like that that the raw dairy can't have, right? Because it's just going to be sold as is. And so the standards a lot of times for raw are a lot more, especially if you know where you're getting it from. So that's like why we, with organic pastures, we chose them, because we know where it's coming from, how they treat the cows, what they're eating. And they have a standard where they go in and they test. So they get all the milk from the cows, and then they hold it and they test it. They run it for like 15,000 different types of bacteria. And then they hold it, and 10 hours later they retest again to make sure that it doesn't have anything. Whereas, dairy that's pasteurized, they'll just pasteurize it and then bottle it, or turn it into cheese or whatever. So, but this is, the raw dairy takes a lot more work on the farmer's end, and there have been some outbreaks from raw dairy, but a lot of times that's because the handling of it and how they take care of the cows wasn't necessarily the best. And what they have found now is that farmers that are doing pasteurized dairy products will a lot of times now realize, oh, I can also sell my milk raw for cheaper. So they'll kind of start selling it at farmers markets where it's not regulated, and they're treating their cows the same way that they do the cows that are pasteurized. So you just have to be really careful, like especially at a farmer's market, when you don't necessarily know and there's no background on them, how they're treating their cows of buying raw products. You just want to make sure that you know the source and that they're taking really good care of their cows, they don't have any infections, and that the milk is, that you make sure that it's tested before you drink it, because a lot of times at like a farmer's market they won't. So you can, research about the company, but I wouldn't just go necessarily and buy from someone that says, this is raw, because you don't necessarily know how they're handling the milk. So does that make sense? Okay, great. And the other thing is it's unhomogenized, so it's not blended or crushed and altered. So raw products also have a lot more, like I said, benefit, because it has a lot more vitamins, minerals, proteins that aren't killed off when it's heated. So if you do get raw dairy products, like unfortunately the cream, you're really not supposed to add. Some of it dies when you add it into coffee, some of the good proteins. So technically you're supposed to use the cream in iced coffee. And then same thing with the milk. If you were to heat it, or the cheese in any way, then it would kill off some of the good benefits to it. So you're really supposed to eat those things more like putting them on at the end. So like the cheese, we won't add that necessarily to something that we're cooking, but we'll grate it and then put it on at the end after it's done cooking. So yeah, any questions on that? Does anyone have a raw dairy product they've tried that they really like?
I've been nervous to try raw because of the disclaimer that's on all of this stuff saying
Yeah.
if you have any kind of autoimmune disorder,
Okay.
so anything like that,
Yeah.
because it's been so drilled into your head.
Yeah.
So that's my biggest question.
Yeah.
And we're about ready to try, my husband and I, raw
Yeah.
milk,
Yeah.
because I want to see what it will do.
Yeah. So my kids drink the kefir. They use all the products, but the kefir specifically. And I think in the last year, I don't think either. Chloe didn't start drinking it until she was like 9 or 10 months, and she's a little over a year now. But Cooper hasn't been sick the whole year. And the first year of his life, and he's been around a lot of other kids that have had like pretty serious illnesses. And I'm like, oh, he's for sure getting it. Like, because kids like just touch everything, hands in their mouth. And the last year he's been around like some kids that have had some pretty serious things that it's like super contagious, and he hasn't gotten them. And so, and that's kind of, he's definitely eating probably better sourced food, but I think one of the ways that we have changed his diet in the last year is introducing some of the raw dairy products, and he really hasn't gotten sick. So I really do think that his immune system is a lot stronger because he's getting drinking the kefir quite often, and he loves it. He'll ask for more kefir. I'm like, bud, you need to slow down on the kefir. But yeah. So any other questions on that? No? Okay. Next one is local pasture raised. let's see, so this would be the ideal choice for me, because it's sustainable, because it's local, and then the minimal carbon footprint. So I'll just put on there, minimal. So it's kind of like the other two that we talked about.